All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Friday webinar. We are back in 2023. I am so excited. And today we've got one of our frequent guests who's awesome every single time, Dr. Steffi Lamb. Welcome, Dr. Lamb.
Hello. Thanks.
And this is going to, so I don't know if anyone, I'm going to unveil, but if you look over here, can you see this? This right here, oops. Yeah, it's Lafeber's 50th anniversary. Can you get over that? I mean, that's insane.
Amazing.
50 years, right?
Yeah, wow.
I know. It's like, yeah, it's just awesome. And so we got these little special things here. And I was curious, hey, anyone have a parrot that's like, raise your hand if your parrot's over 50 or 50 and above, and the ultimate senior citizens. We got two, so 3. Okay, it's going up a little bit. That's good. Yeah, because chances are your bird probably, the early years didn't have Lafeber food to have in their life. So yeah, that's oh, look at that. We have some senior citizens that we'll have to get photos from sometime. Maybe you can, I'll share them on our next webinar if you have them, so then we can go through and celebrate our 50 theme here. All right, so we have a very important topic we're covering today, and that's feather disorders. So I think we should probably get an early start on this, because I imagine we will have some questions, and you probably, Dr. Lamb, do you have a presentation for us, a PowerPoint or sorts?
Okay. Yep, I have a PowerPoint for you guys, and definitely at the end I'd like to answer everybody's questions, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that I just didn't think to cover, so I am sure there are going to be lots of questions that people are going to have that I'm going to be like, oh man, I should have included that. So we'll see, and if there's a lot of additional questions, who knows if we'll want to do another a second edition of the topic. So we'll see. But,
okay. And I see Arroyo's joining us today, as always. This is awesome. Yes. So hi, Arroyo. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you since last year.
Yeah.
So. All right. So, all right. If you're just joining us, we are kickstarting our webinar on feather disorders in birds, and we're with Dr. Steffi Lamb. And I think I made you a co-host. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll have you take it over.
All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then.
As you do that, I just like seeing these chats on people's on the comments on the birds' ages. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's awesome having our pets be able to live so long. It's one of the great benefits of birds.
Yes.
So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and get started on our topic about feathers today. And really, this topic is going to be broad because there's so many things that can go wrong with feathers. It's kind of like all the other organ systems that we have discussed when we've talked about the liver, we've talked about kidneys, respiratory. There's lots of different things that can happen. And so, you don't want to think that there's only one possible problem that could go wrong with the feathers of a bird. So it's something that you're going to hear a lot of different things today. And certainly maybe at other times, myself or maybe, one of the other presenters may go into a lot more depth about one of these particular topics. So as we usually start off our talks, I always like to talk about sort of the anatomy and physiology of whatever organ system it is we're talking about first, to help people get an idea of what's normal. And then that way we can start to investigate abnormalities and why abnormalities happen. So first off, just talking about what are feathers and what are their benefits. Well, feathers are made up of material called keratin. And what keratin is just a protein complex. It's this proteinaceous connective tissue complex that comes together to make this structure. And there's two different types of keratin. There's alpha keratin and there's beta keratin. Now, alpha keratin is more flexible. It's a more flexible type of keratin. And it's what makes up our hair. It makes up skin, our skin, bird skin, any animal skin. It's what makes up nails as well. And alpha keratin is present in all vertebrates. But beta keratin, it's much tougher, and it's what makes up scales, it's what makes up claws, and it's what is making up feathers. And it's really neat because beta carotene is something that's unique to birds and reptiles. So we mammals lack beta carotene, but birds are super cool and they get both alpha and beta carotene. So the purpose of feathers is multifold. That helps with insulation of the body. It helps with camouflage. It helps with birds attracting mates. It helps with intimidation of predators. And of course, the thing that we often think about its use for, and that's flight. But we do want to think about all those other things that it's used for, not just for flight, because, you know, those are all important things in a bird. So looking at the feather anatomy, there are some unique different portions to the feather. The feather has both a shaft and it has veins. And so looking at this picture of a feather here, it's a little cut off at the top, but the shaft is this central portion that's running down the center of the feather. And then the vein is the sort of fluffy portion on either side of the shaft. Now, with the shaft, there's two parts to it. The rachis, which is the portion that makes up the feather that's above the skin, and then the calamus, which is the portion that is attached to the bird. The calamus is also called the quill, so you will hear it by either name. Now, the rachis is sort of the most important part as far as length goes, because it's really taking up 90 to 95% of the length of the whole feather. And then when we're looking at the veins have a very unique and important structure that allows for us to have this full appearance to the feather. And it actually, the veins will vary depending upon what type of feather it is we're talking about, but we're going to go into that in the next slide. So first, the veins have barbs. So if you look at this feather here, you have things branching off of it, right? And the big thing that's branching off of it is the barb. But then branching off the barbs are the barbules, and they kind of branch off at about a 45-degree angle. So it makes this sort of like cross stitch sort of pattern. And then branching off the barbules are the hooklets, is kind of the easier name. Barbicels is the harder name. And what they do, you can see how they actually make this little hook. It actually attaches the barbules from one barb to the next one. So it creates this sort of interlocking pattern, and that can allow for a lot of stability to that feather and make it a little bit more tough. Okay, now there's a variety of different types of feathers. There's about 6 different feathers out there in the bird world. The contour feather is the most common type of feather, and it is the one that we think about when we look at the majority of the bird's body. It's what's making up the flight feathers, so that includes the feathers of the wing and also the feathers of the tail, but it's also making up sort of the feathers that are mainly covering the body, the head, and the legs. And it has the typical feather appearance. So if you were to Google search a picture of a feather, you're going to have a contour feather be the most likely feather that comes up on an image. And when you look at your own bird, if you look at their body, the majority of the feathers that you are seeing are contour feathers. And when they drop feathers, I grabbed a couple of feathers from my birds. If you guys can see that there. But here's a contour feather from one of my grays. And then I've got a contour feather, but it's from a different location, from Arroyo. So their majority of their feathers are contour feathers that we see. Now, the next type of feather is the hypopenne feather. And this is a really interesting one. You don't really see this one so well in the vast majority of birds. In fact, majority of the birds that we have in our homes as pets, you actually won't really see these. But if you have like an emu or a chicken, then you might actually see this particular type of feather. And this picture does not do it justice. I do have the different types of feathers numbered over here, and it does correlate with the feathers that are present in this photo here. But what this feather is it has sort of that regular shaft that has the veins coming off, but there is a small feather projecting from the side of it. So it looks like two feathers together. And I do have a better picture, which I'll show you guys in a moment, but I also have an example of one here. If you guys want to look at the video, you see how this is it looks like a feather, but then there's like this small little feather that is attached to it as well. That's actually all one feather. You can see that there is just one little calamus right there. And it kind of is two feathers in one, essentially. And that actually has all to do with the way that the feather develops and as it's growing, which I'm not going to get into because it's actually kind of a complex thing of how the feather actually develops. But the reason this little extra one is there, it's sometimes referred to as the after feather, is actually all to do with development of the feather. A semi-plume is the next one that is seen in the photos here. It is a wholly fluffy vein. So remember, the veins are the portions that are on either side of the shaft, and the entire veins are just really fluffy. And I have an example of one right here. This is a semi-plume. You can see just sort of how fluffy it actually is. You have that central shaft there, the radius, but the veins on either side are just super fluffy. The next one is the phyloplume. The phyloplume has a very long rachis with a tuft of feathers at the free end. So at the very tip there, you have these little fluffy feathers there. And then contrast that with the next one, which is the bristle. And it has also a very stiff, typically long rachis. And then there's some barbs more like at the proximal end. And I have an example of that one here that I'll show you guys. And I don't know how well this is going to come up in a video because this is the teeniest, tiniest thing. So I have an other picture in the PowerPoint that to hopefully like emphasize it a little bit more. But I promise there's a little feather in my hands here. And this is an example of a bristle. I mean, you can barely see it. Maybe if I like move to the side, there we go. I have the contrast of that black door. You can see it's just this stiff rachis. And then there's some barbs at the proximal end. So like you see down there, see how it's like a little fluffy? That is those little tiny feathers. Now, these are really interesting because these are usually like sort of sensory ones. So again, a lot of our parrots don't really have these. This tends to be like, I got this from a chicken. And they're at certain areas where like if those get hit, they kind of provide a little bit more sensation for. And then of course the down feather, we have this guy over here. This one has a very short rachis. The barbs are actually longer than the rachis. So that's what the definition of a down feather is. You have a short rachis and longer than the rachis are the barbs. I don't have a sample of one of those in front of me right now, but I have pictures of those in the PowerPoint as we go along. And then there's another one that some considered to be the seventh feather, and that, or type of feather, I should say, and that is the powder down feather. And most of the powder down feathers have the same structure as the down feathers. It's just they shed a white waxy powder that is keratin actually being sort of flaked off. So any of those people that have the powder down species in their home, so people who have grays or cockatoos, you definitely have a little bit more dust in your home if you have one of those birds, and that is because of that powder down that they produce. Okay, so just a little bit better picture. So if you couldn't really see, if the drawing didn't do it for you, or my little example trying to show in the image here during the webinar wasn't good enough, I tried to take pictures of these feathers as well. So I just think this particular type of feather is a really interesting one, the hypopenne, where it has that after feather. So you have that single calamus there. You have two rachises coming off of it, and I kind of pill it up over here in this picture so that you can see that it's like essentially almost like two feathers on one little calamus. There's that little bristle feather that I was trying to show a picture of. Comes up a little bit more clear here. And then here's a picture of that semi-plume. Again, you have the shaft consisting of the calamus and the rachis, and then you have these veins coming off, but the veins are fluffy the entire way. That's what makes it a semi-plume. And then here's some pictures of powder down feathers. Now, these are ones that had just recently popped off of a bird. And what the powder down feather is again, it's often like the down feathers, but it has this keratin that flakes off. So what you can see in this image here is that keratin that's sort of covering the down feather itself. And then you can see it's sort of that keratin covering sort of breaks off and flakes off, and you start to expose that fluffy down underneath. And I do have an actual picture, or a video, excuse me. I'm going to go to that really quickly here. So this is a video of a powder down feather. This had exfoliated from the bird, and we're going to show you when the bird is doing its grooming, it breaks that outer keratin sheath off, and as it breaks that keratin sheath off, that's where all that powder is produced, and it reveals that fluffy downy feather below. So here is the video for you guys so that you can see that. So you see the individual is breaking this open with their finger. A bird would be doing this with its beak, and see how it's letting out all that white fluffy stuff. That's that keratin that's getting released. You can kind of see it on the person who's doing this. You can see it on their fingers coming off all over the place. So all that fluffy stuff, that's that keratin that's flaking off. That's what's all around your house if you have a powder down species, making it a more dusty environment. And then it reveals that fluffy feather below. So, all right, we're gonna go back to here, and hopefully that allows everybody to get an idea of what the powder down is actually like. Because when you look at your bird grooming itself, those powder down feathers are often kind of tucked underneath the contour feathers, so you don't see them as well. So you just see your bird kind of messing around with something underneath its contour feathers, and that's what they're kind of doing. They're breaking off that keratin beneath. Okay, now, the other thing that's important to know about our feather anatomy is feathers are in different locations on the body, and they're named by their different locations. So in this picture here, what we're showing are the remiges. The remiges are the flight feathers. So remiges are just sort of the scientific name for those flight feathers. Oftentimes, we just sort of colloquially will say flight feathers because we know that they're important for flight. They're the ones that are on the wings. But remiges is the scientific, more precise name. And even amongst the remiges, those are further broken down into very specific types. And there's the primaries, which are the outer 10 feathers, the secondaries, which are sort of these inner feathers, and they range in number, but also somewhere around 10 to 12. And then the tertiaries, which are tucked up over here. You can see them also on this picture down here too. We have our primaries, we have our secondaries, and then our tertiaries are tucked up here. You can't see the tertiaries so well. Now, the reason those all have different names is because those feathers are branching from different parts of the body. So your primaries are actually coming from the carpus. So the major and minor metacarpal bones. So like if you're looking at my hand here, it's the bones that are right here that are actually having the primary feathers be branched off. In the picture here, that carpus is right here. And so those are all your primaries that are coming out. Then you have your secondaries, and your secondaries are coming off of the ulna. So if my hand is a bird wing, this is where the ulna is, this portion of the bone, and you have your secondaries coming off of there. And then your tertiaries are coming off the humerus, so this bone of the bird. And they're numbered differently, actually, too. And the way that they're numbered is how they molt. So the primaries are numbered from inner to outer. So like number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so on and so forth. And the secondaries are numbered as well, but they're numbered from sort of outer to inner. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. The reason there's numbers to them is because that's actually how they molt. So they will molt from one out And so when we are looking at them, like as a veterinarian, when I'm looking at a bird's wings and an owner's asking, like, have they molted? Are they going to molt? I can look and say, like, okay, if I see a blood feather has dropped or is coming in at this particular location, I can know, looking at it compared to the other feathers around it, like, okay, this one did just molt and it's fully in, and you know, here it is, but this one is going to be dropping at some point later. So now other feathers, so again, those are the remiges or the wing. The retrices are the tail feathers. So just so people know, if they hear remiges versus retrices, remiges are wings, retrices are tails. And then the coverts are the like smaller contour feathers that are just close to those areas. So like these feathers up here, you can see all these like smaller feathers that are sort of covering up the primaries and the secondaries. So those are considered the covert feathers: primary coverts, secondary coverts, tertiary coverts, that sort of thing. So those are all the names. Should anybody be so interested in bird feather anatomy, there is actually a lot more to it than just that, hey, birds have feathers. So now that we've gone over the feather anatomy, now we are ready to go into the different types of problems that we can see with feathers. And there's a few different things, just like every other webinar that we've done, focusing on different systems. Again, remember that there's not just one problem, there's many problems that are out there and can affect our birds. And so when it comes to feathers, here's a list that you guys can see of disorders that can occur. Infectious diseases can happen with feathers. Nutritional problems can result in feather changes. Trauma can result in abnormalities with the feather, lack of normal grooming, and then I put another category as oddities, because there are some different things out there that I wanted to discuss that didn't kind of nicely fit into one of the other categories. All right, so getting into it, infectious diseases. Well, what kind of infectious diseases are out there? Because when you go online and you do like research of bird feather problems, and you look up infectious diseases, you will terrify yourself, because there are some horrible things that are on the internet that sound really, really, really scary, that you would definitely not want your bird to have. But as many things on the internet are not always, I guess, showing what is commonly out there, I don't want people to get nervous when they go online and look up any sort of infectious disease problems with birds, because thankfully, as time has gone on, we have gotten better in the way that we're caring for birds and the way that we test for infectious diseases and the way that we do quarantine of birds. So some of these infectious diseases aren't as big of a problem as they used to be when birds were sort of first becoming our pets in our homes and popular in the pet trade. So the infectious diseases, though, that I'm going to talk about, viral infections, there's PBFD is sort of the short name, but that stands for psittacine beak and feather disease. That's caused by a virus that can cause some substantial damage to the feathers, which I'll show you a picture of in a little bit. Polyomavirus is another virus that's out there that can cause some feather changes as well. That's something that tends to be more in younger birds, but can be present in older birds as well. And feathers are just one of the things that can be seen associated with, or feather issues are one of the things that can be seen associated with polyomavirus. In fact, we worry more about some of the other problems than the feather problems necessarily with that. But you can have things like bacterial infections where you just get a surface bacterial infection on the skin. There is just overgrowth of yeast or bacteria that are on the skin that can cause infection. As I mentioned, yeast is a fungal organism. The most common thing that we will see is candida. There's a variety of different types of bacteria. I have gotten so many different types of organisms isolated from the skin of birds. So I didn't put any particular type of bacterial infection on there, because there's just like tons of different bacteria that are out there. And if there is a lesion or inflammation or something going on, bacteria can secondarily invade and cause problems as well. And then for parasitic infections, the one that's most common in pet birds, and it's most common in our smaller pet birds, it's not so common in the larger birds, is a parasite called Nematococcus. That particular organism, it's a little mite, and it can lead to some changes around the feathers, around the beak. It changes the beak more so than it changes the feathers, but you can see some feather loss around the beak associated with it. It also can cause like changes to the nails and sometimes feathers close to the feet. So it tends to be a little bit more damaging to other parts of the body, but can also affect the feathers to some degree as well. Okay, so to go specifically into the citizen beak and feather disease virus. This particular virus is a little bit more common in Australia. We see it much more in the birds that are out there that are considered the old world species. So when we talk about different species of citizens, they're broken up into old world and new world. New world being like the Americas, old world being Australia, Africa, Europe, Asia. So in our old world citizen birds, we see this particular virus more. And this is a picture of a little bird that has the virus. And you can see that when you first look at it, you can go, well, this bird doesn't look totally normal. And it has a lack of normal, healthy looking contour feathers. There's certainly contour feathers present. Again, these contour feathers are all over the head here. They're supposed to be all over the body, but you can tell over the crop area, okay. But then once you get a little further back, things are starting to look a little abnormal. And when you get to the wings and the tail, well, like where are its primary feathers and secondary feathers? Where are those remiges and those rectrices? Like I don't see them as well as they're supposed to. You can see little nubbins of things kind of like trying to come out, but they're definitely not healthy looking feathers. When we look at these closer, we will see that there will be like sort of the feather shaft will get sort of pinched, or as a new feather is coming out that's in blood, a blood feather that's coming out, it'll be sort of bent, or they'll be like hemorrhaging in like the pulp cavity. And when the feather then emerges from the keratin sheath that's covering it while it's in blood, once it comes out, it can look sort of scrawny and like pieces of it are missing. Some of the barbs or barbules are missing, or it doesn't have that normal zipped appearance. So this virus definitely is out there. Where I'm living in Arizona, we do actually have a little bit of a problem of it because we have feral lovebirds in Arizona, and those feral lovebirds do have it in their population, and it comes in waves. So like some years are worse and we have more of it as a problem, and some years it's a very small percentage of individuals that have it. So it kind of goes in this up and down sort of thing. But the problem with this virus, yeah, it definitely causes damage to those feathers. And with each subsequent molt, when they have this, like the feathers look more and more and more abnormal. They can live with their feathers being gone. The problem with this virus is that it actually damages their immune system. And so it makes them much more susceptible to infections of a variety of different types. And they often can pass away more because of secondary infection than necessarily this primary virus that is causing that damage to the immune system and damage to the feathers. Okay, this little budgie that's here, I put up for a couple of reasons. One, it was a picture that was sent to me that's really quite interesting. What you can see is this really long, weird feather that's coming off of this bird here. And I don't quite know, I didn't personally see this bird, so I didn't get to do a further good inspection, but it does almost look like those powdered down feathers that we were showing you earlier that kind of have that long, shaft of keratin sort of over them, and the bird has to break that off. But really, it shouldn't be this long, crazy, dangling thing here. Now, this particular bird is a budgie, right? And budgies are one of the species that we see and worry a little bit more about polyomavirus in. And when a budgie gets polyomavirus, depending upon the age at when they get it, they can go on to survive from the virus. The virus can be deadly. It is absolutely something that when it gets into a flock, it has the potential to be quite deadly, and even more so for non-budgie citizens. But with budgies, if they get it at a certain age, then they tend to have more feather abnormalities than other problems from it. So it's a question of, could this potentially been a budgie that had polyomavirus as a young individual, and it led to some dystrophic feather development? And by dystrophic, I mean abnormal feather development, and that's why it has this crazy long thing. Or is it possible this is some weird genetic abnormality? It's hard for me to say, since this is just a photo and I didn't actually get to see the bird myself personally, but it is something that's quite interesting, and something to consider that could have been caused by a virus. Okay, now to go into nutritional causes for feather issues. So when you look at this bird, the question is, well, what species of bird is this? Because what bird is gray and pink? Well, looking at it, it's hard to tell, but this is a species of Amazon. And this particular bird had a very poor diet over a long period of time. And because it had that poor diet, it definitely was lacking a variety of nutrients that are important for normal feather coloration, feather development. There's many nutrients that are involved in feathers, but big important ones that we know of, protein, of course. Remember, we talked about what are feathers? They're made up of protein. So if you're having any sort of protein deficiencies, and remember, when it comes to proteins, there's 22 different individual amino acids, and these individual amino acids link up together to make your bigger protein molecule. And if you're missing certain individual amino acids from that 22 group that you need to have, you may not have normal keratin or other protein production, and you could potentially have really weird feathers. Also, certain B vitamins are really important for normal feather health, feather growth, feather development. And then vitamin A is really important as well for normal keratin production, and also important for the coloration that is happening. So any one of those nutrients, whether it be your proteins, your vitamin A, or one of the various B vitamins that's really necessary for important feather development, any of those being off in the diet could result in some very abnormal feather production. So this bird thankfully was able to get into a home where she could get a better diet. And this is sort of her in her transition from having feathers like this to where she actually starts to get some new healthy feathers that are normal for her species in. And you can see that, wait a second, that does look like an Amazon underneath there. You are starting to have some of these healthy yellow feathers coming in that are supposed to be present over the side of the face. You're starting to have some of that green coming in that's covering up the pink. So, I mean, yes, she's unique and very, very beautiful bird. But those feathers are not normal. And it was because of poor nutrition over a period of time that caused her to have health problems, and these feathers abnormalities developed. So definitely an extreme case for sure, but certainly one that's worth sharing with everybody so that we can all see just how important nutrition actually is to maintaining health, and if the feathers are looking abnormal like this, what else is going on internally in the body? Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about was trauma to the feathers. And trauma to the feathers can happen through a variety of ways. That can be self-inflicted, where a bird's doing the classical destruction of its own feathers, feather destructive behaviors. It can be from conspecifics. So that means a friend, their friend that's hanging out with them in the cage could be causing damage to their feathers. Or it could be just that they're young and they're goofy and they don't know what they're doing and they fall all over the place and they just trash their feathers. Okay, so here's some pictures of some birds that have self-inflicted damage to their feathers. And in particular, what I want you guys to pay attention to is look at all this fluffy down that is exposed. So remember how I was saying the contour feathers are the main thing that we usually see, and there's down underneath? Well, if this bird was not engaging in feather destructive behavior, those contour feathers would sort of be covering up these down more. And so when you see a lot of fluffiness and down like this in an adult bird, this is something that makes me go, well, you know, this is something that's more from self-inflicted behaviors as opposed to, you know, one of the other causes that we mentioned. Now, maybe there's a reason for, you know, one of those other reasons that could be making them feel not right, and then they start causing self-inflicted trauma to their feathers, because self-inflicted trauma to the feathers is a really big problem. It's something that we see a lot of. But the real frustrating part of the self-inflicted trauma to feathers, and feather destructive behavior as the term is more appropriately known by, is that there's so many different reasons for it to happen. So that honestly is a talk in and of itself, because a bird can cause trauma to its feathers for, like, I mean, any reason, you name it, it will like happen or cause them to do feather destructive behavior. So it can be quite frustrating for owners. And again, a topic for another day. But one other thing that I wanted to show you that I think is really important that can help people when they're looking at their bird to go, is this from self-inflicted trauma to the feathers, is look at this particular feather right here on this blue and gold macaw over sort of the neck area. You see how it has this like V shape where a piece has been like clipped off of it. That is a very classical appearance to a feather when a bird has clipped it, because all it's done is that bird clipped that rachis right there. And then because everything that was on the rachis was, you know, the barbs branching off of it afterwards, that whole thing drops off. And if you remember at the beginning when I was talking about the anatomy of the feathers, the rachis has the barbs branch off at a 45-degree angle. So you get this interesting like V shape when you've lost a portion of the rachis and then like half of it's gone. So if you see that, that was clipped off by something. Now, by that individual or one of its friends, well, that's where I don't exactly know. But of course, that's where we then have to investigate for the individual of, well, is this bird in a cage by itself? Is it with friends? What have you. But if you see little feathers like that around on the floor or on your bird, there's some self-inflicted trauma or somebody doing some trauma. Okay, then just quickly to the conspecific trauma. I really should have better pictures than this, but I'm often bad at taking pictures and I forget. But this picture is a great green macaw who's in a cage with some friends. And you can kind of see, she looks a little bit bald. I tried to get a little bit better picture over here. She was scratching her head. And you can see some baldness over here and a little bit over here. Unfortunately, the chain link is right in the way. But when there's feather loss on the top of the head like that, a good majority of the time, that is because somebody else was picking those feathers off that bird's head. The bird often has a difficult time doing damage to it itself that way. Now, I'm not going to say that's impossible. And in particular, interestingly, the Goffin's cockatoo, I've had many who bring their little foot up and like will pluck feathers from the side of their face with their little foot. So it's interesting because most of the time when birds are doing feather destructive behaviors, they're using their beak to do it. But every once in a while they will use their feet and may pluck things. And for whatever reason, it's like the Goffin's cockatoo is one that I've most commonly seen the feather plucking with the face with their toes. But in the majority of cases, if there's feather loss on the top of the head, we want to think that a friend was likely doing this. Not a perfect rule, but something that definitely has to be considered. Okay, and then just here's a picture of a young and goofy bird. And this was actually Arroyo when he was a baby. So this is before he was even, I think, a year of age, when he still had some cute little baby feather coloration on his head here, but you can see he is totally lacking a tail. And the reason he's lacking a tail is because, again, he was just this, when he was a baby, he was just goofy, and he would roll around and he'd like explore so many things, and sometimes he'd fall off of something and he broke his tail. And for a little while there, I was wondering to myself, is this bird ever going to have a tail? But he matured, became less clumsy, and now he's not falling from things as often. So he still can be goofy, and sometimes he will take a tumble, but not like he used to when he was a baby. You can also see on his neck here, the feathers are just kind of tattered. And again, that's because he used to like roll around and just mess those feathers up a lot. So if you have a young bird that has some of these sort of changes, I think it's important to not worry too much, because, you know, just like young humans get themselves into trouble and do silly things, and then eventually learn like, I shouldn't do that. Otherwise, I'm going to have injuries and things. You know, I think these young birds can learn those sort of things too. So sometimes it's just a little bit of growing pains to work through. Okay, now lack of normal grooming can cause feather abnormalities as well. We're going to go over a few of those things with some pictures here. They can be age-related things that makes a bird not want to groom itself. They may have a collar that's in place that's preventing them from doing normal grooming, but then also not having access to a shower could prevent them from going through that normal grooming behavior. So some age-related changes. The first thing I wanted to talk about was arthritis. And with arthritis in birds, it's hard for them to turn around and do their normal grooming sometimes. I mean, we know about arthritis in a variety of different species. And if anybody's had a dog that's old and arthritic, you know that they're kind of harder to kind of turn around and clean themselves. They may look a little more scruffy. Or a rabbit, we see that with rabbits quite a bit, but same thing happens with birds too. They may not be able to get into like the normal postures that they want to, because they may have a little bit of harder time like positioning themselves on a perch in order to groom effectively. And so though they may try, they may not succeed. And so this is a cute little old cockatiel here. That picture was sent to me by Brenda. And he's an old little man. I think he's like 33 years old, which is really awesome. I think the oldest cockatiel I've met was 32. And you see he's got these funny little feathers dangling from the side here. And here's a picture of those feathers sort of on a surface. What those are, we saw them earlier, those are the powder down feathers. So cockatiels are a powder down species as well. And they produce these powder down feathers that often are kind of up underneath the wing here. And they'll turn around and they'll groom them. And because birds are grooming all the time, as they groom them, again, that keratin sort of breaks off. You have that fluffy veins revealed underneath, but then those fluffy veins sort of break off with time too. So oftentimes they are not coming out from underneath the feathers the way they are in this bird, but because he can't turn around and do his normal grooming to keep them sort of appropriate in their size, well, now they're growing longer and starting to sort of dangle down. So if you start to see that in your bird, that's an indication that they're not getting to groom themselves in an appropriate fashion. And then it's important to, you know, figure out like, well, why is this happening? And you may want to take them to the vet and have them looked at to see if they need any sort of like pain medications that could potentially help for arthritis, or see if there's some other reason that's preventing them from being able to get back there. Okay, so here is examples of birds that have a collar on that has made it so they can't get to do normal grooming. Here's just a picture of a cockatoo who had a collar. He's done a lot of grooming on his collar. As you can see, it's very chewed on the ends there. So he's still doing some grooming, but just not of the appropriate thing. But when we have this bird that has a collar on, we're looking at it now from its side in these couple of pictures up here. And again, just like we saw with that little cockatiel, the cockatoo has those powdered down feathers that are coming off along the side. So this is the back leg. So it's kind of like along the back of the thigh here on the side of the body where we have all these powder down feathers coming out. And because the bird has the collar on, it can't turn around as easily to groom those. And again, just some pictures of what those powder down feathers actually look like. Okay, now this one is a picture of a bird that hasn't been bathing or may not understand how to bathe. You see how this feather here has an unzipped appearance compared to the other one next to it. Like this feather is all nice and zipped up and it looks really like perfectly aligned. But this one's all sort of spiky. When birds aren't doing their normal grooming, they may not zip those feathers back into place appropriately. And I can see that this feather looks quite healthy. I don't see any of that like V shape that we were seeing in the pictures of the birds who had done some feather destructive behavior. It doesn't look like anything's clipped off. It's just not zipped together. And so when you see that sort of unzipped appearance, that is often an indication that that bird probably should have some bath so that it tries to do its normal instinctive behavior of zipping that thing back together, because some birds don't really think to groom and zip those things together until they've had a bath. It's like when they have a bath, then they go, oh yeah, I need to like fix these feathers and get this all together appropriately. And so for this bird here, just simply misting it down, giving it a bath, however this bird behaviorally likes to accept bathing, should be done so that it can then groom this thing and get it back into its normal zipped appearance. So it is just a note here that says make sure birds have access to appropriate bathing. And this is Arroyo actually taking a bath. He is Amazon, right? And so Amazons tend to really like to bathe. There's different ways to bathe your bird. Arroyo likes a spray bottle. Not all birds like spray bottles. And for some birds, a spray bottle is a terrifying thing. And they just, you know, think that they're like being shot at, and it just scares them. And it's not the appropriate way to bathe them. But Arroyo really likes the bottle, and he loves, like, if I have a squirt bottle and I'm like spraying other things, he will like come running to like get sprayed by the squirt bottle. And he does this little dance. And so I have some of these pictures here because he's making this crazy face, and then he covers his head with his wings, and it's just this really elaborate thing that he does. When trying to get photos of it, like I couldn't get great shots because it's like really fast and funny. So one day I should probably like film it and have a video of it because I think it's cute. But afterwards, you look at that smile on his face, like that is a pleased bird. He is like doused in water. He's all shiny. And a lot of birds like to bathe, but you have to figure out the way to do it for them and what makes them most happy. Some like the squirt bottle. If those birds that don't like the squirt bottle, don't like the squirt bottle directed right at them, what you can do is angle the nozzle of the squirt bottle so it's like pointing to the sky, squirt up into the air, and then when that water falls on them, it falls a little more lightly and falls like rain, and then that's a little bit more pleasing for some individuals. Some birds just like to bathe themselves in a large dish. Some birds like to go into the shower. There's a variety of ways to do it, and you have to do it in a way that your bird is not going to be stressed. So okay, now just to go into the oddities in the last little bit of time that we have here. I wanted to talk about this particular problem because it is a weird condition that we haven't totally figured out yet. It's called polyfolliculitis, and it's a condition where there are a number of feathers. It can be 2 feathers, it could be 3, 4 feathers, trying to exit from one follicle. Now, it's mostly seen in smaller species. So like lovebirds and parrotlets are the ones that are known for it a little bit more commonly. This bird here is a tiny little parrotlet, and it was giving us a great picture of this condition because you can see here, for example, here is one feather follicle and it looks really thick. And it does the camera doesn't get it really well on this one, but when you look at this next one, you see how there's 1 feather and then 2 feathers. There's a feather covering up here, but there is just 1 feather follicle that these 2 feathers are coming out of. You can kind of see it here too. There's 1 feather, 2, 3. They're all kind of bunched together and coming out of one area. You can kind of see it over here too. So these feathers are all like getting bunched together, literally stuck, coming out of one follicle. And that seems to be rather uncomfortable for these little guys. It's almost like getting an ingrown hair, I could imagine, to some degree. I, of course, don't know exactly what they're feeling. But the way that a lot of these little guys present is they can present with feather destructive behaviors, where they come in and they've just been plucking their feathers. And it can be really frustrating because the bird can pluck these out. So they'll pluck out all these feathers from the single follicle. And then by the time that I see them, I just see a plucked bird. And I can't tell that there's multiple feathers coming out of one follicle because the bird took them all out. So I have no idea. And so they can be frustrating cases because I can be seeing a bird for feather destructive behaviors for a while, until one time when it comes in, and then I can see that there's multiple feathers coming out of one follicle, and I go, oh my gosh, you know, here we could potentially have our answer of why this problem is happening. So it's a frustrating problem, and still something we have a lot to learn about. Another thing that I just want people to be sort of aware of is stress bars and what they actually look like. Because you'll read about stress bars, but actually looking at them can be hard to identify until you've seen them a few times. Now, what are stress bars? They are damage essentially that's happening to the feather when the feather is still in blood. It's still a blood feather and still developing. When a bird is stressed, its body releases corticosterone. We have cortisol, they have corticosterone. It's just a little bit of a difference, but it's essentially the same thing. And if there's a feather that's still in blood and developing during that stressful time, then that corticosterone, when it's released, it causes damage to the feather at the site where there is actively growing, developing feather occurring. And it causes a loss of the barbules and crosslinks right at that site. So it looks like there's just this line where we're missing feathers. And so if you look here, you see how you have this like big black sort of piece that's missing, and it's just absent in these spots. That is where there was a stressful event that occurred that caused a release of corticosterone, and those portions of the barbs and barbules, or barbules, I should say, and the little hooklets did not develop appropriately. As opposed to this, these little things, you can see how they're like weird little hashes. That was probably just some like little bending that happened on the feather as that feather was coming out. Like the bird probably knocked it on something, like as this big tail feather was still in blood and it's coming out, he may have banged it against something, and that just caused a little bit of stress, a little bit of strain, and caused that little bit of change there. But when you see that whole like piece that's missing, that is a stress bar. So that bird was stressed during the development of that feather. Now, the other thing that can happen with stress bars is it can lead to fractures. Now, look at this feather in particular. You see how you have this line right across, and then just everything's missing after that. That's because a stress bar was created right at that site, and all of the rest of the vein fell off and was lost. That is less likely to be, well, that's something that's more likely to be from stress and less likely to be from the bird actually doing it. Now you see this over here, again, how we were talking about that V sort of shaped appearance where you got a clip at the rachis, and then everything falls off beyond it. That's kind of more consistent with a bird who has done some trauma. Now, those are generalizations. So you have to look at like the whole bird and really assess multiple feathers to get a real idea. In this particular bird's case, that happened, I think, not because the bird actually traumatized it with its beak. I think it just banged up against something and that portion of the feather fell. But that is from a stress bar. You see how you can, like, this particular portion of the feather, the barbs, like we're missing a whole chunk here, but then we have some still here, and you can see that sort of black line. That's where that stress bar is. So it'd be very easily for that to fracture off and break off and look more like this. So if you're seeing feathers that look like this, think more along the lines of stress bars leading to fractures and damage. If you're seeing feathers that had them more that V shape, that's when you worry a little bit more about the bird possibly having some self-inflicted trauma, or maybe some other bird bit that rachis and everything fell off past it. So I think that was the last of my oddities that I had. Yes, it was. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing because that was the last of the PowerPoint that I had. So in the last little bit of time that we have here, happy to answer questions.
Okay, wow, that was awesome. I learned a couple new terms. The location of the feathers, the remiges, the tail,
and retrices.
Yeah, those are new.
The remiges are the wing feathers. The retrices are the tail.
Okay. Hey, I had about the stress feathers. Is that something? Would that be something that could be expected if the bird went through a stressful time? Is there a concern if you're seeing that on a consistent basis? Like, is there
Absolutely. If you're seeing it on a consistent basis, then you really have to question what's causing this bird stress, right? At these times. The pictures that I had were from a young bird. And I will say young birds, they tend to have them more because there's a lot of stressful things when you're young and you don't know anything about the world yet, So like everything that's new has the potential to be stressful for a young bird. So we do see them more in young birds. But if you're seeing them, like if I see them in a young bird, I talk with the owner like, hey, these are from stress, just to let you know he was stressful at this particular time, something to be aware of, just make sure that you're mindful of his stress, watch for stressful cues, those sort of things. But if they are going to go through a molt and then have those again, and I see them again, then we go, okay, well, why is your bird still stressed? If it's beyond that young bird sort of new exposure to everything phase, why are they still having stress bars? Really, we need to talk about things and try to figure out what is causing this bird stress so we can have it not be stressed, because nobody likes to be stressed.
And are there some species that are easier to spot on them than others? It's this little coloration. Like if you're, I guess no, I was thinking maybe a black.
I'm trying to think. There's certain colors that are easier to,
because those are really obvious on the green feathers you're showing and stuff. So.
Yeah, I guess I never sat there and thought about that. I'd have to
think about that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. If can feather plucking be related to a disease, like if you're being treated for a bacterial infection?
Absolutely. Feather plucking can have a million different reasons for why it's occurring. So yes, that is one of the numerous causes for feather plucking problems. But again, that topic is so much more involved and unique to each individual, that it's when I have a bird come in and we're talking about feather plucking, we actually, if an owner calls and says they want to talk about that's why they're bringing their bird in, we actually set aside more time because we know that those birds have a lot more discussion that has to happen with the owners and time that we have to sit there and analyze what could be causing it.
Wow. Okay. Let's see if we have time for one more question. We did get a lot of questions, some really good ones, which I think hopefully if we didn't get to, obviously, if we didn't get to your question today, we'll either email you a response, or maybe we could do part 2 of this segment because it's just so important, and so it's so educational. So let's see if we can get one a follow-up webinar on this topic. And let's see. So I made one more question, and I'm gonna wait for that question. I'm going to today we have a giveaway. Forgot we have giveaways every webinar, and we are going to give away Lafeber pellets today. That was the diet that kind of kickstarted the whole Lafeber difference. Starting 50 years ago. Look again, 50 anniversary of Lafeber. Amazing. So today's winner is Linda Lehman. So congratulations. And you also can another product of your choosing from Lafeber. So they'll contact you, send that out to you and your bird. Hopefully that makes your weekend and your bird's day. Let's see. See if we have one. Okay. Is there any treatment for the okay, I got a word. I'm gonna fumble this word. Polyfolliculitis. Did I say that right?
Any treatment for polyfolliculitis, we don't have a perfect treatment figured out yet, but a lot of times what we are using right now is more pain control, because it does seem like it's a painful process of having all those feathers coming out. And so I'll often use medications called non-steroidal anti-inflammatories that are used to help reduce pain, but also reduce inflammation associated with that condition. It's not a perfect answer. You know, we also sometimes, because they're like actively causing a lot of trauma, sometimes they get secondary infections and they need to be on antibiotics, but antibiotics are not the primary drug that's used for it. It's just used secondary if they happen to have a secondary infection that happened associated with it. Sometimes we're having to put collars on them to prevent them from getting to the area. You know, collars are absolutely a controversial thing. And I have to personally say I'm not a huge fan of collars unless the bird is actually doing physical damage or just using them temporarily because of the bird's mental health. We want them to be happy individuals. And it is stressful having a collar on. So we try to make them be more temporary things, but there are absolutely some individuals out there who do need them. And so it's very much a case-by-case basis. And I have some patients with polyfolliculitis that I have had to manage with some sort of nice soft collar that makes so they can't get to the area to damage themselves. Otherwise, they just tear their skin apart. So it's definitely an area for us to do more research on, learn more about, and figure out different ways that we can help them better. So hopefully in the future, I'll have a better answer that's going to be helpful for more birds.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I mean, everyone, just all these appreciations for your presentations. They're so invaluable and informational. So thank you. And I want to announce what we have next Friday. We're back with another webinar next Friday. We're with Lisa Bono, and she's going to do behavior, why understanding instinct is key. So that time will be 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Dr. Lamb is so generous. She uses her lunch hour to give us these in her busy clinic time. So there's, and I see that Arroyo looks like he wants to exit the room. So I think on that note, he's standing by the door. It's kind of cute.
Right.
All right, everybody. It's welcome back 2023. We got some fabulous webinars on tap for the year ahead. So, and Dr. Lamb, of course, you're an integral part of that. So thank you again for all your time.
Yep, no problem.
Everyone have a wonderful weekend. All the best to you and your flock, and everyone stay safe. Bye. Till next time.